Hi folks, and welcome to another video of mine. In today's video, we're going to talk about why I chose the Samsung AU9070, and one of the key reasons as to why I chose this television was gaming. And I do a lot of gaming on my PS4 Pro. I've still not been able to get my hands on an Xbox Series S or a PS5 due to the availability in, you could say, the right market, the white market, because it's available in the gray market, but they're charging a whopping figure. And I'm still not in that position to be able to spend that much. I'm not willing to, and I don't want to support scalpers. Let's put it that way. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about why I chose the AU9070 for my gaming requirements, and what should you be checking out in a television if you actually want to enjoy gaming. So that's what this video is about. So let's get started, folks. Okay, so the first thing that I would probably check in a television, and I did check with the AU9070 as well, is how good is the input lag. Yes, in case you're wondering, what is the input lag and what exactly does it do? Now, in simple words, input lag is the amount of time it takes for your buttons actions to get to your TV screens. That's right. If you press a button, there is an action that takes place on your television. So let's say, for instance, you're playing a shooting game and you want to shoot at somebody, right? So from the moment you press that button, how soon does that information actually get displayed on your television is what the input lag is all about in simple terms. Now, the lower the input lag, the better it is. Because if you have a high input lag, then just picture this scenario, where you're pressing a button and you get to see that on your screen after a few, you could say, like 20 seconds or 30 seconds. Well, that's a long time. In fact, even 1 second is a long time. So that's why your input lag is calculated in ms, that is milliseconds. Now, the lower, the better. Some gaming monitors actually come with very low input lags, in fact, extremely low. Now, in case of my television here, the input lag is somewhere around the 11 millisecond mark, and I would rate that as all right. Whether it's your 1080p content or whether it's your 4K content, your input lag on this television, the AU9070, is around the 11 millisecond mark, which is respectable for your gaming purposes. So that's one of the reasons as to why I bought the AU9070 by Samsung. And this gaming requirement of mine was very specific, and this was one of the first things that I checked out in the AU9070. So it checks that box straight off. Okay, that brings me to point number 2. And point number 2 is actually the response time of this television. Now, the response time of this television is also respectable. The Samsung AU9070 comes with a response time of around 7 to 15 milliseconds. That's right, it falls between that range, and that, I believe, is a respectable response time. Now, in case you're wondering what exactly is a response time, now your response time, in very simple words, is the time taken for a pixel to move from one color to the other color. Now, this can have a direct impact on your motion blur or your motion as well. So if you have those fast moving scenes and if you have a very high response time, then that can have a negative impact on your motion and your motion blur. There can be artifacting, there can be smearing, etc., and all that stuff. So that's why it's important for you to have a television which has very low response time. The lower, the better. In fact, you would see some monitor manufacturers claiming that they have a response time of 1 millisecond. So that's one of the other things that I wanted to check off while I'm buying a television. And the Samsung AU9070 falls in a respectable, you could say, 7 to 15 millisecond. For a television, that's decent. And it checks off this particular box as well. And it definitely gives you a great experience when it comes to your gaming. Now, my third requirement in a television that I needed for gaming, and this is perhaps a very polarizing point. Now, the reason why I say this is because some might consider this to be, in fact, a negative point for your gaming requirements. But in my personal opinion, and I'm not going by any technical specifications, and I'm not showing you a lot of numbers. I'm going to share my experience that is real world experience with this television, the Samsung AU9070, and that is MEMC. That's motion smoothing, or the ability for your television to be able to reduce the judder. Now, in the case of Samsung, there is a setting called picture clarity settings, and within that picture clarity settings, you do have judder reduction. And if you set your judder reduction to, let's say, the maximum, which is 10 in this case, then you have this smooth motion kind of a look and feel to whatever content you are playing. So if you're playing movies, for instance, 24 frames per second is what the movies come at, because they are recorded or created at that native 24 frames per second. But what this MEMC, or motion estimation and motion compensation, that's what it stands for, does is that it inserts additional frames, in very simple words, to make your 24 frames per second content look like it's 60 frames per second. Now, a lot of people may not like this effect, because it's also going to give you that soap opera effect for movies. So a lot of movie producers, a lot of movie creators, they do not prefer that you actually switch this setting on. But that's talking about movies, and I kind of moved away from games. Now, when it comes to gaming as well, you know, the reason why a lot of gamers are not fond of MEMC could be because of the impact that it has on your response time or on your input lag. Now, please note that MEMC does require processing power of your television. Now, if you are a gamer, I would also like to mention that if you have a lot of processing going on in your TV, I would advise that you shut it off. For instance, if you have any kind of a high contrast or a contrast booster, turn it off. If you have any kind of a setting which takes a lot of your processing power, turn all of those settings off, because the more you keep your television, you could say, free, the better it can perform, and the input lag and the response time will not be impacted. Now, one of the key concerns that gamers might have is the fact that when you turn the judder straight up to 10, or when you have this MEMC feature turned on, then it can actually have an impact on your input lag or on your response times. Well, technically speaking, yes, it can, but it depends on how good the algorithm is, how well the television manufacturer has actually implemented. The execution of this particular feature is extremely important, because if you have a poor implementation of MEMC, if you turn it on and if you have your gaming on, it is going to have a very bad impact or a negative impact on your input lag and on your response time. So it kind of, you know, goes to that example of let's say having a full array TV with local dimming zones. You can have, you know, as many as 150 or 200 local dimming zones, but if you don't have the right algorithm, it's not going to do you any good. So you're not going to be able to really enjoy the dimming zones, you could say. Whereas on the other hand, if you have a lower amount of dimming zones, but your algorithm is really solid, it's rock solid, then you still will be able to enjoy your dimming, your local dimming, that is. So the same concept actually, you know, kind of works here as well. It's how your television manufacturer actually implements or executes this particular MEMC feature. Thankfully, in the case of Samsung and Samsung AU9070 specifically, the MEMC implementation, or the judder, or the motion smoothing, motion estimation, motion compensation, MEMC that is, the implementation is rock solid. It's really good. Now, I have made a separate video where I've actually spoken about my gaming experience. I've shown videos, you know, where I've played Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I've also played Ghosts of Tsushima on my PS4 Pro. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that I've played it on the PS4 Pro is because let's take Ghost of Tsushima as an example. Now, the PS4 Pro is only capable of dishing out 4K at 30 frames per second when it comes to Ghost of Tsushima. And this is a good point to note. What this MEMC does for you is it makes your content look like it's actually running at 60 frames per second. So you have your Ghost of Tsushima running at 4K, although 30 because of PS4 Pro, but because of your television, it looks like it's running at 4K 60. So it gives you that experience, you know, that you are actually playing on a console like PS5. In fact, it's that good. And I've actually slowed down the content, and I've showed you this in my other video where I've spoken about the gaming on AU9070, and I've you know, done a bit of slow motion, and I've compared the videos with this MEMC feature turned on and without the feature. And I can say with confidence that the MEMC works in favor, and it does not impact your input lag or your response time. I have not experienced any ghosting. I have not experienced any screen tears. None of that is actually happened on the Samsung AU9070. In fact, the MEMC, and I'm taking my time, to talk about these features because I love this feature on a television, especially when it comes to my games. And if I'm playing games and if that game actually gives me the feeling of 60 frames per second, I've got my money's worth. So you've got my PS4 Pro. Although it's only able to dish out 4K 30 on paper, my television is doing the other part of the heavy lifting for my PS4 Pro. It's complementing and boosting the performance of the games. So at the end of the day, when it comes to the real world experience, to my eyes, it looks like 4K 60. That's how good it is. So this was one of my most important requirements when it came to buying a television. And the Samsung AU9070 in this case does not disappoint. In fact, it will satisfy your gaming requirements. Now, of course, a small disclaimer here. This particular feature, the performance might vary from game to game. So for instance, I have played so many Assassin's Creed games now. Unity on the PS4 Pro is not a very smooth experience, and it has, you could say, frame rate drops. And in that kind of a scenario, you might have a negative experience when it comes to games. So you might experience some kind of screen tearing on the screen, and you can see that as well. But again, it varies from game to game. For majority of the games, and I've played so many now, I've played Control, Ghost of Tsushima, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Spider-Man, I have played Control, so many games. So the experience has been very positive, and I have thoroughly enjoyed my gaming with the MEMC feature turned on. And I took my time to explain this because when you buy this and when you experience it yourself, you will completely understand where I'm coming from. So even though you don't get my drift now, when you do experience it in real life, you will appreciate it. So I wanted to mention this third point, which is MEMC. One of the other things that I did, and this perhaps is the last point that I actually want to talk about today, and the inclusion of variable refresh rate. That's right, VRR. In fact, it's even got auto low latency mode. So, it automatically kicks in because as soon as you turn the console on, it switches into the game mode. Although I don't play it on the game mode, and I have my reasons why. In case you want to know, please do check out my gaming video on the Samsung AU9070, and you'll be able to understand why I don't enjoy playing it on the game mode. In fact, I play it on another setting. But the last requirement of mine was that a television should have variable refresh rate. And why does this come handy, or why is it important? Now, you remember I spoke about that example of Assassin's Creed Unity in my previous point. Well, if you do have games, where your frame rate is not constant or consistent. For instance, there are some games which run at a comfortable 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second, and it's able to maintain that momentum. But there are certain games, and it varies from developer to developer, and there are certain games, let's take Cyberpunk 2077 as an example, where there are significant frame drops. Now, in case you have significant frame drops, there is going to be screen tearing that's going to appear on your screen, and that is not a very good experience. Now, what this variable refresh rate can help you do is compensate for that screen tearing or for that loss. So it does come handy. Now, I know what you're thinking. Game developers cannot take that as an excuse and create games where you have this, graph moving up and down. The frame rate should be consistent. I completely agree with all you folks. But in the event that there are frame drops, your variable refresh rate will be able to compensate for that. And I, however, have not been able to enjoy that because I don't have a Series S or an X, like I told you at the start of the video. But I am looking forward, to testing a Series S or an X out, maybe in the near future when I am able to get my hands on one of these consoles. And I will be able to let you know my experience on the variable refresh rate as well. But this is where it comes handy. So it gives you that smooth experience without, getting impacted by frame drops because of the game. So this was one of my last requirements, that I was looking for in a television. Now, this particular model, the Samsung AU9070, checks off all these boxes. So response time, input lag, MEMC, and variable refresh rate. By the way, I have already spoken about the auto low latency mode, and that's already in there. And not to mention, last but not the least, it does have a dedicated games panel as well, where you're able to tweak the game settings. but in my experience, I think it requires an update because when I do set the MEMC or the judder too high, it doesn't seem to be kicking in when it's on game mode. So I think there's a software issue there with this television, which of course can be fixed through a software patch in the future. So in case you're worried, well, you kind of should be because you're paying your hard-earned money. But let's hope, fingers crossed, that Samsung actually fixes this with a future software update. But I just thought I should mention that the MEMC or the motion, you could say estimation and motion compensation, the judder, does not kick in the game mode right now. Again, subject to change. Fingers crossed, and let's see what happens. Now, in the last section, I said, perhaps this is the last point. And the reason why I said perhaps is because there's one more point that I do want to talk about. Now, that is whether the television is capable of dishing out 120 Hertz or not. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know you're going to say that, hey, Punchy Man, the AU9070 is not capable of dishing out 4K at 120 Hertz. I completely agree. But this video is not about what I've already purchased. It's about when you're out there in the market, what are the things that you should be looking at. And of course, you've got to consider budget in mind as well. I didn't want to spend more than a certain amount. And of course, I wanted a television in a specific size, which is 43 inches. That's why, I settled in for this one. But I do want to talk about having a television which can do 4K at 120 Hertz with HDR. So if you are out in the market and if you want to buy a TV for your gaming requirements, that is, this is one of the key reasons that you do have to keep in mind. So you could say I saved the best for last, because now we live in a world in 2021 where you have 4K gaming with the current gen consoles, Series S, X, and PS5. It actually is capable of dishing out 4K content or 4K gaming with 60 frames per second, in fact even 120 frames per second, although that's limited to 1440p technically, but hey, 4K, that's the word, that's the key. So is your television capable of dishing out 4K at 120 Hertz with HDR? So this is one of the key things that you do have to keep in mind while you're out in the market to purchase a television for your gaming requirements. In fact, it could be one of the key reasons as to why you do buy a TV for your gaming needs. 4K 120 Hertz with HDR. Now, this TV behind me, unfortunately, it can't do 4K 120 Hertz, but it can do 4K 60, and of course, it also can do 120 Hertz, but that's limited to 1080p only, because this, like I've said it in my other videos as well, it only comes with HDMI 2.0 and not HDMI 2.1. Well, you do need your television to support HDMI 2.1 if you want to game in 4K 120 Hertz with HDR. And do make sure that you check off this box as well while you're buying your television for your gaming requirements. And I thought I should save this point for the last, because some people might not have that in mind at all. Yes, I'm saying that some people might not have that in mind at all, because in the grand scheme of things, in the long list of specs, blah 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 blah, we can get lost, and we can miss out this very important feature. So I thought I should mention that, and hopefully this will stay in your mind, because this was the last point that we discussed today. Alright folks, so that brings me to the end of the video today. Hope you have enjoyed this content. In case you have, please do leave a like and also subscribe to the channel. In case you want to get notified with all my latest videos, please also hit that bell icon, because it helps you getting informed whenever I release a new video of mine. Well, that brings me to the end of this video. That's a wrap for this one, folks. Thank you so much for watching. Until we meet again in the next one, this is me signing off. And I would say, take care, stay safe, and may God bless you all.